Tom Dunbar. Welcome to the Trusted Podcast.
Thanks, Bill.
How are you doing, Tom? You've had a busy start to the year from what you mentioned. Good stuff, I hope.
Yeah, it's been pretty busy. I think you're referring to our pricing change, which got announced yesterday. But yeah, it's been a good start to the year.
Excellent. Is this your first podcast? Have you done many of these before?
So we run our own Transact podcast. I wasn't intending on promoting it, Will, but now you've asked. I've done a couple of episodes on that, and I did do a podcast on transfers with Citywire about a year ago. But other than that, it's my first go. Yeah.
Well, I suppose this is going to take a slightly different form. It's going to be talking about Tom as the individual. You know, it's the comfort zone typically falls around talking about the business. This one, we're going to dig a little bit more into you as a person, and I think that's a really good place to start. I think understanding how you got into the sales profession to begin with, what that's meant for you, and you know, you've had a monumental rise, and so to give the audience something on that would be a really great place to start, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so I'll try and do a quick kind of, I guess, career summary of how I ended up in various sales roles then. So I guess I did chemistry at university, and I was debating about whether I should go into kind of researching science, but in the end I decided to try a business career, and I got a job in a company called Friends Provident on their graduate scheme. So I got to spend 6 months in different departments of the insurance company. IT, finance, sales wasn't one of the 6 departments, but I managed to squeeze in a 2-week placement in the sales team. After 3 years at Friends Provident, I went into consulting and spent the next decade really working for platforms, life insurers, fund managers on strategic decisions, growth strategies, business restructures in the UK and in other markets as well around the world, which was fantastic. Great opportunity to travel in my 20s. But then I guess when I had a kid, I wanted to spend more time in the UK, more time with the family. And so I looked for a kind of in-house job, more UK-centric company, and I'd done a lot of work with the CEO of Royal London, so I joined Royal London as strategy director. And then I guess where the sales link came in is after a couple of years doing that role, I moved to run distribution for Royal London Intermediary. So that was, I guess, my first real exposure to a sales role. And then after a couple of years of that, I joined Transact, where I took on sales, marketing and change and then operations and then into the role I've got today.
It's really interesting, Tom, when you talk about, you know, doing a science-based degree. We've had so many people on the podcast, you know, in season 1 and the start of season 2. And the amount of people that have maths degrees or science-based degrees completely, you know, unfinanced, I guess. It's really interesting, that crossover.
Yeah, I mean, in my 4th year, I was researching and making very random new chemical compounds, which ended up finding no applications, but was interesting. So yeah, that's I think when you do something that is pretty bizarre, you end up in financial services.
Yeah, really interesting. And you mentioned there some of the strategic roles that you were in, you know, I guess running some of those distribution teams. How does someone who has, you know, never done I guess boots on the ground role become a leader and, you know, eventually a chief exec in your case?
So in terms of the Royal London move, it was quite a big one, because strategy director, you're obviously doing a lot with boards and lots of PowerPoint slides, but you're quite a long way from, you know, the advisors and customers that you're selling to. So I was really lucky in the Royal London example. I managed to have a 6-month handover period between the previous sales or distribution director and myself. It was someone called Jim Smith. He'd been the sales director for 19 years. He was a very, very experienced sales manager, and I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with him in the run up to taking over. But I guess also, to answer the question, the team that I inherited, so the sales leadership team I inherited, had over 100 years of experience in sales at Royal London. So you have to do a lot of listening, you have to ask the right questions, and you know look to draw on the experience of your team to help you make the right decisions for the business.
Do you feel that in that situation that you had to do much to win over the sales team? You can get a tricky character might form a BDM, or did you feel that by taking a step towards a more humble approach of I've not been in your shoes, but I'm here to help support you? Was that enough to win them round?
Yeah, I think it was quite a tough environment. You've got very successful salespeople, very experienced managers, and they want to know you know what you're going to bring to the table. Obviously, you can start and make a decent impression initially by saying you're just going to listen and learn, but ultimately they're going to want to hear what the vision for the department is. They want to understand what kind of person you are, what your values are, and other things like that. And so yeah, over time, I guess I had to try and do my best in running departments, setting out a vision, and leading the business forward in a way that was positive.
I guess in a funny turn, that is sales in itself, isn't it? You have to sell your team on your vision, and you need to be bought into that, and you need to get them, to also be bought in it, probably as much as you are, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And look, I had in the consulting world, I'd done a lot of selling to kind of CEOs and business unit executives. So I did love um, selling. I did love trying to understand the client, their requirements, and think about how I could help them. So I did enjoy that, but I don't think that's necessarily the same skill set you need to be a sales manager and a leader of a distribution kind of function that had over 200 people in it.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And obviously, Jim will have taken you under his wing, and that I think that having him there for that 6 month period will have really helped to give you baptism by fire and bring you up to speed really, really quickly. Has mentorship been something that has run throughout your career? Is it something that you've tried to foster yourself? Do you see a benefit in taking people under your wing if you are in a more senior position, or finding a mentor who can help you as you grow through your sales career more generally?
Yeah, it's a good question, Will. I think I've been lucky to have a range of formal mentors and also, I guess, informal ones over the course of my career. I can think of three formal relationships: one when I was in consulting, one when I was at Royal London, and one now at Transact. And all of those are helpful. You need to find someone you trust and where you feel safe and you feel like the conversation is very confidential. But they're super powerful. But I would probably say the informal ones are more important than any formal relationship you might be lucky enough to have. And I think that's about a lot of my, if I look back and think of my mentors, a lot of them have been my bosses in different roles, and a lot of those relationships I still maintain now, and I still talk to those individuals now about challenges, about strategy or leadership, or whatever area I found it helpful to ask them about and learn from them. But I guess you just have to observe everyone else, don't you? You have to look at other leaders around you, and look at the things they do well, and look at the things you think, well, I might be able to do that better or in a different way. So you learn a lot from other people, but you also have to be authentic and do it your own way too.
I guess that's the really interesting thing that I find about mentorship, Tom, is, when I look at my, short career, I guess, is there have been a few instrumental people in there, and a lot of it is learning from the mistakes that they've made, even though, perhaps the environment or industry has changed when they were back in my space, there is still a lot to learn, and you're completely spot on there. I guess you still need to make those mistakes in an authentic way and still go through the ringer and go through the pain of doing it. But it certainly helps bring down that pain, pain threshold, I guess, because they've done a lot of the mistake making for you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, that observation and learning and putting into practice and reflecting on what you did and did you do it well and could you have done it better. I think that discipline is much more valuable than if you meet someone for an hour in a formal mentoring relationship. There's only so much you can get out of those conversations versus reflecting on yourself all the time.
Yeah. Interestingly, obviously, you've seen distribution teams for a significant chunk of time. Obviously, the profession within the sales space has changed, and I think one of the things that we hear is always about behaviors have changed slightly. We see that BDMs are typically more broad and less technical. What have your observations been of sales and how that's changed over your experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you have to start with how the industry's changed, because you need to think about, in our industry, I guess it's the financial advice profession, and how that changes, how the different components of the industry change, what you're selling, to who you're selling it to. Obviously, all of those things make a big difference for how you run a sales team and the kind of capabilities you need. And obviously regulations change as well, and it's been, there's been a lot of pressure on, highly incentivized sales schemes from the regulator where you're selling regulated products. So, you have to adapt to some of those changes as well. If I think about my two experiences, at Royal London, the kind of individual pension or the protection sales were very one-to-one to an advisor. We had salespeople with very small panels of advisors that they were covering, and they were expected to see those advisors regularly and really try and almost fight and sell for every client and every case that the advisor placed. Whereas at Transact, selling the Transact platform, you've got larger panels of advisors. You need to try and get the platform embedded within the advisor's business. That typically involves not just engaging with the advisor, but also power planners and administration staff, and also potentially some of the executives in that firm. But then you're not as day to day talking about every individual case as a salesperson, as we were in the Royal London model.
There's probably like the tax efficient space, I suppose, that we tend to find their BDMs, who are going out selling VCTs or EIS because they are so like individual, those cases. The BDM that we speak to from that side of things, they're so specific, and they always seem to have 100 meetings a day and are constantly in the car and all. That reminds me more of the selling that people think back over the last kind of 20 years or so, whereas I agree more, it's much more consultative now when you're talking about more volume products, MPS, funds, platform even more because of the complexities that run with that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do think, I feel like I should defend I thought what I learned about consultative selling at Royal London was incredibly informative. I think they ran a really effective distribution team that were really, really good at asking questions, understanding why, trying to help advisors grow revenues, reduce risk or reduce cost in their business, and really making sure that relationships were strategic, value added, built trust, even though they were selling an individual product line. So, I'm not sure it's a one-to-one, but I agree that approach to selling is really important. I don't think a purely relationship-based sales approach really works as well anymore.
And we talk about there being sort of multiple models, I guess, of being a sales professional in our industry, Tom. How does remuneration play a part in that? You know, if we're looking at a BDM that has a panel of 20 clients that they are solely responsible on and need to be really, really in that firm, you know, compared to a different product where, like we say, we have a wider pool of prospects and that BDM is purely a hunter. What are your views on remuneration?
Yeah, good question, Lewis. I mean, I've seen a few different models. I've seen and worked with models where the base to bonus ratio is more like 50-50, and the variation between salespeople is quite significant. You know, maybe 200% differences in outcomes. And then I've worked in other models where you know the base to bonus ratio is much higher. You know, 90-10, and the variation in outcomes is quite small. And there are pros and cons of the different models. I mean, my observation is it's quite hard to move from one to the other, because once you've built a model, you attract a certain type of person, and it does get hard to make changes. So every time I've been a sales kind of leader, I haven't made major changes to the scheme that existed. And I guess as a leader, you have to priorities, right? You want to make certain amount of changes to the strategy, to the business. And I've never felt that major changes to the REM scheme has been kind of an area I've wanted to focus on.
Yeah, it makes sense. We have this challenge all the time. You know, you're right. There are pros and cons. You know, from a more consultative point of view, the last thing that you want is for salespeople to appear desperate, because I think it can actually make the transaction more opaque. I think if you recognize and you can feel that there's something in it for that person at the other end, it makes the consultation biased. You know, it's the same as buying anything. I hate buying a car and going in there and being absolutely flogged to, because that, you know, salesperson gets more commission on this particular model than he does on the other one, even though the other one might be more suitable. And at the other side of things, you know, and this goes back to your point on organizational strategy, is then what are the growth ambitions of the business? Because sometimes you do have businesses that are in extreme growth phase and that they therefore need salespeople to deliver. And I think the sweet spot is probably somewhere in the middle, somewhere where you can get a mortgage on your base salary, but that does promote and foster almost an entrepreneurial revenue driven space. And it is never going to work for all people, and I think we need to be reticent of that. And from a sales point of view, it's okay to say, you know, that scheme doesn't really apply to me, and it is, you know, there are alternatives that suit my family and my lifestyle better. You know, there isn't a one size fits all approach, because the people's circumstances are so varied.
Yeah, and I think the more incentivized the scheme, the more focus you need on risk and controls to mitigate from outcomes. So, you know, that's just something you have to be very, very conscious of in the regulated environment that we work in. I mean, the other interesting thing to say, thinking about Transact, is obviously the role of a salesperson has changed quite a bit over 25 years. When the business started out, obviously I wasn't involved in it, but the sales team were explaining what a platform is, and that was a kind of different conversation to the conversation you have now, where, you know, everyone knows what a platform is, and it's more about your differentiation. But you don't have to start at the beginning of the whole thing. So it's been I think hopefully an interesting journey for some of the salespeople who've been within the business a long time to see how those conversations have evolved.
You say about people staying, you know, a long time, Tom. I don't think it's a secret that Transact are incredibly good at retaining staff. You know, we, from outsiders looking in, we see a lot of your sales team, and you know they have been at Transact for a very good amount of time, and over, I guess, the last 5 years, I think there's probably an increase in people moving around a little bit more and spending less time at, you know, one provider or one employer. What's the secret?
It's a good question, Lewis. I won't propose that I know all the answers and can speak for some of my colleagues who've been at the business a lot longer than I have, but I guess a couple of things that probably make a difference. First is that I think the proposition is really strong. I think there are lots of differentiators that the Transact platform has versus its peers, and for me anyway, that's exciting. It's nice to be part of a selling a proposition that's differentiated, and I think what's good is we make 100 changes to the platform every month. The proposition continues to evolve, and I think when you've got something that's unique and continues to develop, it's easier as a salesperson to build trust and demonstrate you're delivering on promises. I think the danger is if you're selling something that doesn't have a lot of differentiators, the danger is you're tempted to overpromise or talk about things that aren't there, and I think that can end up being quite damaging, not only for the company but for the salesperson as well. So I think that's one reason, and I think the other reason is that Transact is a great place to work. It is a really collaborative environment. There are so many fantastic people, and I think that anyone who joins Transact really enjoys working there, is passionate about what we do, the difference we try and make to support advisors and their customers, and so I think that makes a difference as well. But I'm sure if you asked the Transact sales team, there would be other things they'd say too.
Yeah, I don't think it's a reflection that the business has been on the winning team for a long, long time, that continued to develop. We mentioned price changes at the start. It's not something that platforms do often, and you've done it consistently, every year for a long, long time. And I think that proposition point, especially from the sales perspective, is so important. We always have this conversation about, what's life like after insert firm that you're working with at that time. And I've always kind of pondered that reality of, is there an end point? Is there my dad's just retired in the last couple of weeks from having been 33 years at the same company. Now, I can't say that it's because he loved it. Maybe it's better the devil at times, but that kind of clear propositional aspect. And just to give you some background in there, Gareth Davies, who you may have come across, so he's a recruiter in this space, and he always talks about this idea of these 6Ps. There's the obvious ones like package and panel, but proposition is so strong in there, but also, working alongside your peers, understanding the company that you work with, how you integrate with that. So I'm glad that you kind of corroborate that, because that really stuck out to me. Because one thing that's worth noting, Tom, if you weren't already aware, is about a third of the trusted audience are senior leaders. And I think being able to give them that insight is a good way for them to help their team get more out of their careers as well.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks for sharing. And I guess you both, Will, you've been a platform sales consultant, and I guess you've moved to do something a little bit different. Interesting in your take about what keeps you and what keeps some of your team in the business. Is it proposition and culture, or are there other factors?
Do you know what, Tom? It's a really interesting question. And if you ask me today, it's very different to what it would have been this time 5 years ago. And I think that, if it was 5 years ago, I would have said, oh, it's packaged, it's about the money, go and earn the money. And, then as soon as you've got the money, you'll be financially free and you've got choice. And I think that it was a very quick realization that wasn't a motivator for me. The big thing that I want out of my career is to be remembered for having pioneered something, is to, in 10 years time, for people to look back and say, those are the guys that did that thing. And because, again, when I think about what I want out of my career, I'd like to progress through the ranks. I do want to lead our business, whether it's one that I do myself or whether it's a timeline. It doesn't really matter. And so I've just kind of immersed myself in this position of, where am I going to learn the most? Where am I going to get the deepest experience, for good and for bad? And therefore that really underpins where I want to spend my time. And it's not always the easiest route, I suppose. But some of the team, they have completely different motivations. We know that there are people in the twilight of their career who are thinking about, maximizing earning as much as they possibly can before they retire. There are other people who are so culture driven. So again, that's my personal circumstances. I'm willing to kind of weather the hardship to get the resilience building and all of that kind of stuff. But Lou, I'm not sure what your take on that is, but
I think it's quite similar. I think, we chat a lot about this. Me and Will, Tom, I think you probably know we live 5 minutes from each other. So most days we're out on a walk or a run, and we spend a lot of time talking about stuff like this. And it is funny because you might think two salespeople, probably in it for the package or remuneration, whatever you want to call it. And I actually don't think that's true. And when you speak to a lot of salespeople in the industry, I don't think it's true. I think for most roles will pay a pretty similar ballpark figure. It's then your bonus that makes the little bit of difference, I guess, like you said earlier, Tom. But I guess the reason why there are people for every role in every company in our space is because everyone has different views of what they want, and every provider or employer has different views, different things they can provide. For me, it's exactly the same. It's, as Will mentioned, to do something to, that we can look back on and be proud of, to be exposed to stuff, that until 3 months ago, our BDMs were reporting into our, Ed Carey, our CCO at Timeline. So it was quite a really good exposure part for us. So that's our view. And I think people look past package, and I'm really glad you said there, Tom, there isn't a secret sauce, because that was the answer that I was sort of praying for. It's a mix of things. There isn't a secret sauce, but it's really good for people like Will who have just taken their first step into sort of senior leadership to know that there isn't a secret sauce, and that people will have different views on different wants. Their why is different. We mentioned why in the Christmas episode. So yeah, that's my view, and I think it does go beyond package for most people.
We get that probably from hiring as well. When you're interviewing people, a big part of what I like to do when we're hiring for BDMs or, a more junior position is to understand values, what motivates people, what pisses people off, to see if they're a good cultural fit. Because as you'll know, startup culture is not for everyone. It takes a certain type of individual. A big business is not for everyone, and they can feel stifled. And that kind of filters into the next question, Tom. You work with lots of different people from a sales capacity over your career. What is it that you tend to find is a trait that runs concurrently with successful salespeople? And where do you think that salespeople consistently get it wrong, and what can they do to improve?
So I guess the first part of the question were around consistently good attributes for successful people. I do think a lot of it is around asking why and being curious. I think it's really important to think about, obviously, the market you're operating in, your customers, the advisor, their model, their business, what they're trying to achieve, the company you're in. So not just the very narrow, product you're trying to sell, but really try and understand the organization you're in and what it's trying to do, but also understand the proposition, understand, and make yourself an expert as much as you can. And then, so I think understanding why is a really important trait. And then I think the other aspect of it is around trust, delivering on your promises. I think you that is one of the most important things in any kind of leadership role is doing what you say you're going to do. And I think those are two really important traits.
Yeah.
And from your point of view, Tom, when you say about sales professionals asking why, how do you, I guess, in your day job, or how should salespeople balance the line between being curious and being difficult, and challenging that a little bit too much and becoming a bit of a pain? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think you've obviously got to be sensible, and asking why doesn't mean just asking your boss why. It means reflecting and learning yourself about topics. So why are we doing that? The answer is, then you go and research and you go and find it out and you observe, why advisors are doing this. So I think it's different to just asking questions and demanding answers. So yeah, I think that's the key bit, really, Lewis. I don't think, for me, coming to the question you asked me about me, if something goes wrong at Transact in my role now, I am interested into why it went wrong, because often you can be quite, when you get up in an organization, the danger is you lose touch with some of the lower levels in the business. So if an issue does float up to me, then I am interested to go and understand what's happened and why, and talk to a few different people about the issue to get different perspectives on it, because I think that gives me an opportunity to learn. I mean, I still don't know everything about our business. There's still lots of things within Transact that we do that I don't fully understand. So that type of thing gives me an opportunity to understand more about our business and reflect on, is there a kind of narrow thing that we needed to change to not do it again, or actually is this issue a consequence of something bigger that needs addressing?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And we've got a final couple of questions, and one of them that I was really curious about was, from an outsider's perspective, it looked like you were earmarked, as the potential successor for Jonathan Gunby. I think, being able to kind of prepare for what might happen as you go through that stage. And, from our point of view, we hear lots of different routes for salespeople. Some is to go into senior leadership, some may become advisors, some may just be career-long salespeople. What more can we do to kind of advocate salespeople for progression? And do you feel there's ever a position you are ready to take that step to chief exec, or is that just something you kind of have to, maximize your chances of succeeding and then kind of suck it and see?
Yeah, so I was lucky at Transact. I was recruited by Jonathan, who was then the CEO of Transact, and he did, at the point of recruitment, talk about me. So that was 4 years before it happened. He did talk about coming on board and he would support me in the transition. He was open then that he was thinking about his retirement and the future of the business. So I was lucky to have a fairly lengthy and gradual process where I could take on more responsibility over time. And I hope this doesn't come across as arrogant, Will, but I did feel ready when it happened. I was really keen to take on the role when it came, and I guess when you've had that amount of handover, and I did feel ready. Obviously, in other scenarios where you kind of come in externally into a big role, you don't have that luxury, and you are under more pressure to make a good impression and come up with what's it called 100 days strategy within 100 days of being there, and that's difficult. I've been lucky at Transact because I was heavily involved in shaping the strategy for the business before I became CEO, so there was a manageable amount of new things that I needed to deal with when I took on the role.
Amazing. It's so good to hear, Tom, and I guess your story is really inspirational for a lot of our audience. In our group we have 700 plus sales professionals, and that ranges from junior salespeople, internal BDMs, all the way up to sort of head of sales, sales directors, chief execs like yourself. Also external, marketing, investment teams, people that see themselves as salespeople, even if their job role doesn't necessarily say sales. And as you and your journey have been such an inspiration, what message, I guess, would you leave to the trusted community on how to get more out of their career and how to potentially do something like you've done and make that huge step up to the top dog seat? What's the one message you'd like to leave to the trusted community?
Well, I don't think anyone should feel boxed into the career that they're in, or the level. I certainly wasn't. I didn't really see myself as a natural salesperson before I started doing sales. I didn't really see myself as a natural manager before I started managing people. I'm not sure if any of my friends at school or university would have seen me as either of those things, but I guess you just try and learn and do it your own way, and reflect on what you do well and what you could improve, and over time you might surprise yourself that you're able to do roles that you didn't think you could do more easily than you could, right?
Tom, we've spoken about a changing landscape, both in sales and in the advice profession that we serve, and technology plays an enormous part of that. What trends are you seeing? What challenges do you see off the back of that? And what are we doing as a profession to improve our chances of success?
Yeah, so you're right. Technology is playing and going to play a bigger and bigger role in our industry, and therefore it's going to become more and more important for salespeople as part of their conversations. If I look at Transact as a business, historically we have differentiated around service and around the functionality of our platform, but really the hidden differentiator is our software, and in the future we are going to release more and more API technology, which is about how systems integrate together. And therefore, I think technology is going to become much more of a direct part of the sales pitch than it ever has been. And I do think that has consequences for sales. And, 20 years ago, we could just say Transact, it runs its own technology, and that was kind of all the questions we were asked. Now we've got larger firms, bigger firms, they've got CTOs and COOs, and the conversation around technology is the bar is much higher. They want Transact to integrate with other technologies they're using.
Yeah.
And they expect, the salespeople representing those companies to be able to talk about software and APIs in a way that I guess we never had to 10 years ago.
Yeah, this is exactly my experience. I remember my first ever hearing about APIs when I was at AJ Bell, and this is a reflection on me, not on them. And I remember anybody who would ask about an API, we'd have a team for that. We'd just like hook them up with the tech guys who understood that piece, and we were like, well, no, this is what the platform does. And I've probably in the last couple of years never had more requests for cybersecurity information than any ever before, because people are waking up to it. It's a vulnerable profession that we work in because there's lots of small companies with lots of very valuable information, and I think that's just a sign of the times changing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I think, look, I'm not particular. This is, I guess, where the listeners to your podcast will be able to do this better than I can. But I can see the importance of APIs, but it is a challenge to explain that to advisors. You've got different types of advisors, different levels of understanding around technology, and finding ways to bring that into your sales conversations is not easy, and something I don't think I'd do very well.
Yeah, well, whilst we're on the topic of technology, I mean, it would be remiss of us not to mention AI, and I think that's going to be a big part in the proposition world. It's filtering its way gently into sales as well. There are more and more sales lead generators, meeting note takers who are coming into that. Have you got a view on how that will change the sales landscape, how it will change the advice landscape? Are there any kind of lasting thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it's going to have big consequences, but I don't think it means that everyone needs to run around starting AI projects left, right, centre. I think where the industry is heading is that financial advisors who manage the customer relationship want control of their data, and they want to be able to take that data from clients in a structured way through the things you've described, but there's still a lot more that can be developed there, and then have access to all the data from clients, from the platforms, from others in one place, where the power of AI tools can be deployed to make advisors more efficient and can improve the customer experience. And that's why for Transact, our strategy is around integrations and APIs, because we need to surface the data to advisors to enable them to harness the benefits of AI. What we're not doing is building lots of AI chatbots on the front of the Transact experience, because we don't think that's where the industry is going to go.
I think people have a love-hate relationship with call centers, but I think that they will be missing call centers very soon when the only option is AI bots. I'm not sure if you've ever tried to change your insurance or anything like that, but it's a tricky place, and I'd hate for our services to get anywhere near that.
I booked a table at a restaurant the other day, and it was an AI chatbot, and it was a half decent experience, but it was certainly funny speaking to an AI chatbot like I was its mate, and it was sort of pretending to pause, like it was having to think about where to put us in the restaurant, and let me check that a minute, just while I check, what times are available. But the future is certainly interesting, Tom. It's just how firms pivot.
Yeah.
I guess.
And Lewis, I guess how much technology filters into your conversations with advisors, because outside in, it's obviously a component of your proposition, but how big is it?
It's a huge thing. It's certainly, when we're fact finding with a firm, which every salesperson will do, it's which back office provider do you use? What does your tech stack look like? And that does start to build a picture in our mind as to, okay, which bits of Timeline's ecosystem will fit into this, and how does one speak to another? And I think that's the really interesting thing, Tom, is we talk about AI, APIs, and those providers not linking up, and it's no one's fault, because no one has generated an API to be able to speak to one another. Everyone's got their little ecosystem, so it's central to the conversations that I have, and it's only getting bigger. Every conversation I have, tech comes into it in some part. We're no longer just an investment manager that runs an MPS. Same as you're no longer just a platform for custody. You are actually aspirationally much more.
Yeah, we might offer a platform, but we've got to help build the best ecosystem for financial advisors. They don't just want the best platform, they want the best technology ecosystem for their business.
Exactly.
Yeah, and do you know what the interesting trend is? And this is some numbers that, again, I was in with our board yesterday, and Abraham shared these, and I thought it was really interesting that how to position yourself on the side of the advisor. That let's say the addressable market is $1 trillion in the advice space. There's probably 800 million quid on platforms, plus some stuff on life companies, give or take. It'll be $1 trillion if it's not already there. And of that, about 70 basis points of the revenue taken from that £1 trillion sits with asset managers, roughly then about 30 across platform and MPS. And then the advice market, they take about, I think it's 54. This is the latest FCA studies. So of that 54 basis points that they take on average, they then pay out, and so that equates to about 5.4 billion, something like that in total revenue. Of that, they then pay out 300 million to technology companies. So there's 300 million quid up for grabs in the technology space. And I think what I really like about Transact, and it's something that we're trying to do, is to say, okay, although we will provide you an ecosystem and technology, that's not the route of remuneration that we look for. We are particularly focused on, say, asset management. So pay us in AUM for the bit that takes away from maybe the traditional asset managers, and leave as much of the cash that you can with the advisors, and God forbid, let them grow that 5.4, 5.5 billion. I think it's about that. We take the money for either custody or MPS or multi-asset funds, and with it you get the ecosystem that makes you incredibly efficient. And it's that balance. That's how pivotal it is to what we do, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree.
And with that, Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you for all of your wisdom, and I'm sure our community will find it incredibly valuable. So from us and everyone at the Trusted Community, thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you,
thank
Tom.
you for having me. Cheers.